The Ohio 2001 cold case that shocked a community when an arrest finally came was built on a single night of betrayal. Patricia Adkins clocked out of her Honda plant shift on June 29th, clutching $90 cash and dreams of a secret Canadian getaway. She trusted a married coworker who promised her a week of freedom from her struggles as a single mother. But Patty never made it past the employee parking lot. Her truck sat abandoned with her purse, her phone, everything she needed for the trip she'd planned in whispered conversations. The man she trusted denied knowing her well, denied any promises, denied any trip. Yet police dogs found her scent in his freshly scrubbed truck bed. For over 20 years, Marysville, Ohio carried the weight of unanswered questions, while Patty's daughter grew up without her mother. When the truth finally surfaced, one question remained: how long can a community live with a lie? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Patricia Adkins clipped her Honda ID badge to her purse one final time. June 29th, 2001 marked the end of another midnight shift at the Marysville automotive plant, but for Patty, it felt like the beginning of something new. Her brown hair caught the parking lot lights as she walked beside her coworkers toward the employee lot, her steps lighter than they'd been in months. "Have a good vacation, Patty," called out Sarah from accounting, waving goodbye near her sedan. Patty smiled and waved back, but said nothing about Canada. The secret felt precious in her chest, a week away from the grind, away from being a single mother, away from all the weight she carried alone. He'd promised to meet her here, promised they'd drive through the night across the border by morning. She'd given him the $90 for gas and expenses, packed nothing so no one would suspect, just like he'd instructed. The parking lot stretched before her, rows of cars glinting under the security lights. Her red truck waited in its usual spot, but she wouldn't need it tonight. Tonight, she would climb into his vehicle and disappear into a different life, even if just for a week. The humid Ohio air stuck to her skin as she scanned the lot, looking for his familiar silhouette. Other workers drove past, heading home to sleeping families. Patty stood alone now, purse over her shoulder, keys in her hand. The excitement that had carried her through the shift began to mix with something else, a flutter of uncertainty. Where was he? The lot grew quieter, emptier. Her truck seemed to call to her, safe and familiar, but she resisted. He would come. He'd promised. The night swallowed her whole. By morning, Patricia Adkins had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the echo of her trust and the weight of his lies. Saturday morning arrived with the sound of cartoons drifting from the living room. Patty's daughter sat cross-legged on the carpet, still in her pajamas, surrounded by the small overnight bag she'd packed for her stay with relatives. The bag sat beside her like a faithful companion, waiting for its purpose to be fulfilled. Mommy said she'd call from Canada, the little girl announced to her aunt, who was making coffee in the kitchen. She said there would be lots of trees and maybe a lake. Her aunt smiled, though something tight had formed in her chest. "I'm sure she's having a wonderful time, honey. These big trips, sometimes the phones don't work so well." The child nodded seriously, then returned to her cartoons. She had imagined her mother driving through those Canadian forests, perhaps already setting up camp by some pristine lake. Patty had promised postcards, ones with bears or mountaintops, that she could show to her friends when school started again. Lunch came and went. The afternoon stretched longer than usual. Other family members called, checking in, their voices carrying the same careful cheerfulness that was becoming harder to maintain. No one wanted to be the first to say what they were all thinking. By evening, the overnight bag had taken on a different meaning. Instead of a temporary convenience, it felt like evidence of something interrupted, something wrong. The child's grandfather sat heavily in his chair, staring at the phone that hadn't rung all day. "Maybe tomorrow," her aunt whispered to him when the little girl was brushing her teeth. "Maybe she's just having such a good time that she forgot." But even as she said it, they both knew Patty would never forget to call. She'd never leave her daughter wondering, never let a day pass without hearing that small voice say goodnight. The bag remained packed, ready for a reunion that felt increasingly distant with each silent hour. The mailbox became a shrine of waiting, Every morning for a week, someone in the family made the pilgrimage to check for postcards that never came. The little girl pressed her face to the living room window each afternoon, watching for the mail carrier with an intensity that broke hearts. "The mail's here," she would announce, racing to the door before anyone could stop her. Each day brought catalogs, bills, newsletters, everything except the colorful rectangles she expected from Canada. Tuesday passed. Wednesday crawled by. By Thursday, the family's careful optimism had curdled into something heavier. Phone calls between Patty's sisters grew longer, more worried. They began using phrases like, "This isn't like her," and "something's not right." The child's questions grew more pointed. "Why hasn't Mommy called? Did I do something wrong? Is she mad at me?" Her aunt knelt down to eye level, struggling to find words that wouldn't frighten. "Mommy loves you very much. Sometimes grown-up trips are just different than we expect." Friends from the Honda plant began calling too. Had anyone heard from Patty? Was she really on vacation? The stories didn't quite line up. Some workers remembered her mentioning Canada. Others knew nothing about any trip. A few whispered about seeing her talking closely with one of the married men from her department, but those conversations happened in hushed tones, away from supervisors. By Friday, the empty mailbox felt accusatory. By Saturday, it had become a symbol of everything that was wrong. Sunday morning arrived with church bells ringing across Marysville, but instead of comfort, they sounded like alarm bells to anyone who knew Patricia Adkins. She wouldn't miss a week without calling her daughter. She wouldn't disappear into thin air without leaving some trace, some word, some sign. She was safe. The silence was screaming now, and someone had to listen. Monday morning, July 8th, brought the family to the Union County Sheriff's Office with heavy hearts and a manila folder full of photographs. The missing person report form felt surreal under the fluorescent lights boxes to check, blanks to fill, reducing a vibrant woman to data points and physical descriptions. "When did you last see Patricia?" Deputy Rodriguez asked, pen poised over the paperwork. "June 29th, when she left for work," Patty's sister replied. "She was supposed to be on vacation in Canada, but she never calls, never sends postcards. This isn't like her." The deputy's expression shifted from routine to concerned as the details emerged. A single mother, devoted to her daughter, disappearing without a word seemed suspicious enough. But when they drove to the Honda plant to check the employee parking lot, suspicion became certainty. Patty's red truck sat exactly where she'd left it 9 days earlier. Her purse lay on the passenger seat, wallet intact with credit cards and driver's license untouched. Her cell phone was tucked in the console, the battery long dead. Even the clothes she'd planned to wear after her shift hung from a hook in the back, the outfit she'd picked for crossing the border. "Ma'am," Deputy Rodriguez said to Patty's sister, his voice gentle but grave, "this doesn't look like someone who left voluntarily." The Honda plant manager, summoned to the lot, confirmed that Patty was scheduled for vacation the week of July 2nd. Her time card showed she'd clocked out at 12:23 a.m. on June 30th. Same as always. Security cameras had limited coverage of the employee lot, but they were pulling what footage existed. Standing beside the truck, Patty's sister felt the world tilt. The vacation story, the excitement, the secret trip, none of it was real. Her sister had walked into this parking lot carrying hope and dreams, and walked out of it into thin air. Someone had convinced her to leave everything behind, and that someone was now nowhere to be found. The missing person report was no longer just paperwork. It was the first page of what would become a very long and painful story. The Honda plant buzzed with nervous energy as Union County deputies moved through the break rooms and assembly lines, interviewing anyone who'd worked with Patricia Adkins. Workers clustered in small groups during shift changes, sharing fragments of memory and speculation. "She seemed happy lately," one coworker told Detective Manning, flipping through his handwritten notes. "More excited than usual, like she had something to look forward to." "Did she mention Canada to you?" "No, but she mentioned vacation time. Said she needed to get away for a bit." Other interviews painted a different picture. Several workers mentioned seeing Patty talking frequently with one of the married men from her department, a man whose wife and children lived across town, who drove a pickup truck and had worked at Honda for nearly a decade. When Detective Manning approached the coworker, the man's demeanor was notably calm. Too calm, perhaps. "Patricia Adkins?" he said, as if searching his memory. "Yeah, I know who she is. Works in the same section. But I wouldn't say we're close or anything. Her family says she was planning a trip to Canada with someone from work. News to me." He shrugged, hands in his pockets. "I don't know anything about that." The detective made careful notes of the man's responses, the way he maintained eye contact, the casual tone that seemed practiced. When asked about his whereabouts on June 29th and 30th, the coworker provided a detailed account home with his family, working in his yard, watching television. "Can anyone verify that?" "My wife can." But as Detective Manning talked to more workers, the contradictions mounted. 3 different people remembered the coworker and Patty having intense, whispered conversations in the break room. 2 had seen them walking together to the parking lot on previous occasions. One worker specifically recalled Patty mentioning a married man who'd promised to take her to Canada. The handwritten notes grew longer, more detailed. Someone was lying, and Detective Manning was determined to figure out who. The bloodhounds arrived on a humid Thursday morning, their handlers trailing behind with leashes and evidence bags. Detective Manning watched as the dogs circled the Honda parking lot, their noses working the warm air for any trace of Patricia Adkins. The first search yielded nothing useful. Too many people, too many scents, too much time had passed. But when they brought the dogs to the coworker's pickup truck, parked in his driveway across town, everything changed. The German Shepherd named Rex hid immediately. His handler, a veteran of dozens of missing person cases, recognized the alerting behavior. Ears forward, body tense, focused entirely on the truck bed. Rex circled the vehicle twice, then sat and looked directly at his handler. "He's got something," the handler announced. Detective Manning approached cautiously. The truck bed gleamed in the morning sun, obviously scrubbed clean. Too clean. The metal showed signs of recent, aggressive cleaning, scratches from steel wool, residue from bleach or similar chemicals. "When did you last clean your truck?" Manning asked the coworker who stood nearby with his arms crossed. "Couple weeks ago. I like to keep it clean." But the police report would tell a different story. Neighbors had noticed the man washing his truck obsessively in the days following Patty's disappearance. Not just a casual rinse, but serious cleaning that went on for hours. One neighbor specifically remembered the sound of scrubbing at 2 a.m. on July 1st. The second dog, a bloodhound named Lady, confirmed Rex's findings. Both animals detected Patricia Adkins' scent in that truck bed, despite the obvious attempts to eliminate any evidence. "This places her in your vehicle," Manning told the coworker. "That's impossible. I barely know the woman." The handler's report would become a crucial piece of evidence, documenting not just what the dogs found, but what someone had desperately tried to hide. The scent didn't lie, even when everything else did. The bank withdrawal slip told its own story. On June 28th, one day before her disappearance, Patricia Adkins had visited her local branch and withdrawn $90 in cash, an unusual amount for someone living paycheck to paycheck. She was excited when she gave it to him. Her friend from Honda told Detective Manning. Said it was for gas and expenses for their trip. She trusted him completely. The friend, Maria, had been one of the few people Patty confided in about the secret relationship. She described weeks of whispered conversations during break times, Patty's growing attachment to a man who claimed his marriage was troubled, who promised her a fresh start. He told her to pack light, bring no luggage, so his wife wouldn't suspect if she saw them leave. Said they'd buy everything they needed in Canada. Maria's voice broke slightly. Patty believed every word. She thought this was her chance at happiness. The $90, a significant sum for a single mother, represented more than travel expenses. It was proof of Patty's faith, her willingness to invest in a future someone else was planning. She'd scraped together that money from grocery funds and gas money, convinced it would be returned tenfold in the form of a romantic getaway. Detective Manning showed the withdrawal slip to the coworker during a follow-up interview. She gave you money for the Canada trip. I don't know what you're talking about. Multiple witnesses say she gave you $90. People gossip. Doesn't make it true. But the lies were becoming harder to maintain. Other workers came forward with more details, how Patty had asked for vacation days, specifically for the first week of July, how she'd mentioned needing to buy Canadian currency, how she'd researched tourist attractions near Niagara Falls on the break-room computer. The bank slip sat in Detective Manning's evidence file like an accusation. Patricia Adkins had paid for her own destruction, funding a trip that would never happen with money she couldn't afford to lose. The press conference on July 30th drew local reporters and curious residents to the Union County Sheriff's Office. Detective Manning stood beside the sheriff, a folder of evidence that told a compelling story but lacked the one crucial element needed for justice. We believe Patricia Adkins is the victim of foul play, Sheriff Williams announced, his voice steady but grim. We have a person of interest, but without additional evidence, we cannot file charges at this time. The transcript of that conference would haunt the family for years. The sheriff outlined the case methodically. The contradictory statements, the dog alerts, the suspicious truck cleaning, the money trail. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. Yet the law demanded more. The Union County Prosecutor's Office has advised us that without a body or direct physical evidence linking our person of interest to Miss Adkins' disappearance, we cannot proceed with an arrest. The sheriff continued. In the audience, Patty's sister felt her world collapse. They knew who had done this. They had proof of deception, evidence of planning, witness testimony about the relationship. But none of it was enough to satisfy the legal standard for prosecution. What about the dogs? A reporter asked. Don't they prove she was in his truck? They prove her scent was present. But without additional evidence of what happened to her, that alone won't support a murder charge. The cruel mathematics of justice. Suspicion plus evidence plus motive still equaled nothing without proof of death. The coworker, who had refused to attend the conference, was legally protected by the very system designed to find truth. That evening, the case files moved to a different section of the sheriff's office. Not closed, technically, but cold. The active investigation slowed to a crawl as detectives were reassigned to newer cases with better prospects for prosecution. Patricia Adkins became a file number, a cold case, a name on a list of the disappeared. Her family's anguish became a footnote in the bureaucracy of unsolved crimes. Christmas 2002 arrived with snow and the weight of an empty chair. The family dining room table, set for 8, held one play setting that no one dared remove. Patty's daughter, now a year older but no less confused, still asked when Mommy would come home for presents. The chair had become a ritual, a refusal to accept absence as permanence. Each holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, the family set the table with Patty's place, complete with her favorite coffee mug and the cloth napkin she'd always used. She might come back, her daughter said quietly, touching the empty chair's arm. She might surprise us. The adults exchanged glances heavy with shared sorrow. How do you explain to a child that some surprises never come? That some people disappear not by choice but by violence? That justice sometimes sleeps while families wake each day to grief? Patty's sister had taken on the role of family spokesperson, fielding occasional calls from reporters on slow news days. The case file gathered dust at the sheriff's office, but the family's determination never faded. They organized small memorial gatherings, kept Patty's name in church prayers, refused to let the community forget. People want to move on, she told her husband late one night, wrapping Christmas presents for Patty's daughter. They want to stop talking about it, stop thinking about it, but we can't. She was our sister, our daughter, our mother. We can't just pretend she never existed. The child's Christmas list that year included a simple request at the bottom: please bring Mommy home. Santa couldn't deliver everything, but the family vowed that someone, someday, would bring Patricia Adkins the justice she deserved. The empty chair waited through winter, through spring, through summer. Years would pass, but the place setting remained, a testament to love that death couldn't diminish and time couldn't erode. The dusty case file box emerged from storage in 2006 like an archaeological artifact from a more optimistic time. Detective Sarah Chen, newly assigned to cold cases, opened the cardboard container and found 5 years of accumulated hopes, dead ends, and bureaucratic frustration. The photographs made her pause. Patricia Adkins smiling at a company picnic, holding her daughter at a family gathering, laughing with friends at a birthday party. A vibrant woman reduced to evidence markers and police reports. Chen spent weeks reading through witness statements, re-examining the timeline, studying the forensic reports. The case files painted a clear picture of deception and probable murder, but the legal obstacles remained unchanged. Without a body, without a confession, without that one crucial piece of evidence, prosecutors would not move forward. She interviewed family members again, hoping time might have loosened someone's memory or conscience. Patty's sister arrived at the sheriff's office with renewed hope, carrying the folder of her own newspaper clippings, anniversary remembrances, letters from other families of missing persons offering support. "We never stopped believing," she told Detective Chen. "We never stopped asking questions." Chen also reached out to the coworker, now divorced and living in a different county. He agreed to a voluntary interview, arriving with the same casual demeanor that had characterized his interactions with police 5 years earlier. "I told you everything back then," he said, settling into the interview room chair. "I don't know what happened to Patricia Adkins." But Chen noticed things her predecessors had missed: micro-expressions, hesitations, the way he shifted when certain questions were asked. She documented everything, adding new observations to the thick file. The investigation yielded no breakthrough, no smoking gun, no dramatic revelation. Just another set of notes added to an already heavy box. Another year of waiting for justice that seemed increasingly distant. The true crime television boom brought Patricia Adkins back into the spotlight in 2008. Cold Case Files devoted 22 minutes to her disappearance, complete with dramatic reenactments and interviews with investigators. Production crews descended on Marysville, filming exterior shots of the Honda plant, the sheriff's office, the roads Patty would have traveled on her final night. The show's producers interviewed Detective Manning, now retired, who spoke carefully about evidence he couldn't discuss publicly. "We know what happened to Patricia," he told the camera. "We just can't prove it in court." The family participated reluctantly, understanding that media attention might generate new leads. Patty's sister sat stiffly in her living room, surrounded by photographs and memories, trying to compress years of anguish into television-friendly soundbites. "Someone out there knows something," she said directly to the camera. "Someone saw something, heard something, knows something that could help us bring Patricia home." The show aired on a Tuesday night and generated hundreds of tips. People called claiming to have seen Patty in distant states. Others reported suspicious activities from neighbors. Amateur detectives offered theories about organized crime connections. The sheriff's office processed each tip methodically, following up on anything remotely credible. But the tips led nowhere. Sightings proved to be misidentifications. Suspicious activities had innocent explanations. Elaborate theories collapsed under scrutiny. The television exposure brought attention but not answers. Sympathy but not solutions. The coworker declined to participate in the show, communicating through a lawyer that he had nothing to add to his previous statements. His absence from the program spoke loudly to viewers, generating even more tips about his suspicious behavior, but still nothing investigators could use. The production notes from the television show joined the growing file, another layer of documentation in a case that seemed to generate everything except justice. 10 years. A decade of unanswered questions, of growing up without a mother, of anniversaries marked by candlelight rather than celebration. The vigil on July 2nd, 2011, drew more than 300 people to the Honda plant parking lot where Patricia Adkins was last seen. Candle stubs from previous vigils lay scattered around the makeshift memorial someone had created near the spot where Patty's truck had been found. Flowers, weathered by seasons, surrounded a simple wooden cross bearing her name and dates. Patricia Adkins, 1968 to 2001. Patty's daughter, now a teenager, stood beside her aunt and grandmother, holding a white candle that flickered in the evening breeze. She had grown into a thoughtful young woman, but the absence in her life remained a constant shadow. "She would be so proud of you," her aunt whispered, watching the child who was now taller than her missing mother had been. The vigil featured prayers, remembrances from coworkers, and a statement from the current sheriff promising that the case remained active. But 10 years had changed things. Original investigators had retired. Key witnesses had moved away. Memories had faded. Still, the community came. Some attended every year. Others were new faces drawn by curiosity or compassion. The local pastors spoke about faith, patience, and the importance of never giving up hope. The newspaper photographer captured the scene. Hundreds of small flames flickering against the growing darkness. The co-worker did not attend, though he still lived less than 20 miles away. His absence was noted by many, discussed in whispered conversations after the formal ceremony ended. Some in the crowd had worked alongside him, remembered his behavior in the weeks following Patty's disappearance, wondered how he could stay away from a memorial for someone he claimed barely to know. The vigil ended near midnight, but the weight of absence lingered long after the candles were extinguished. Adolescence brought new questions and old pain. Patty's daughter navigated high school hallways where classmates had complete families, where mother-daughter moments happened naturally around her. Her graduation photo would join a collection of milestones her mother never witnessed. The family had learned to create rituals around absence. Birthday celebrations included a moment of silence. Mother's Day became a day of remembrance rather than gratitude. Her grandmother taught her to cook Patty's favorite recipes, passing down family traditions through the gaps left by loss. "Tell me about when she was young," the teenager would ask, hungry for stories that connected her to the mother she barely remembered. Her aunt would share carefully chosen memories: Patty's love of music, her fierce protectiveness, her dreams of traveling beyond Ohio. But some stories remained untold. The struggles of single motherhood, the loneliness that made her vulnerable to false promises, the desperation that led her to trust someone who betrayed her completely. Meanwhile, investigators quietly re-examined evidence using newer techniques. DNA analysis had advanced significantly. Computer databases had grown more comprehensive, and cold case units had developed better strategies for solving old crimes. Detective Chen, still assigned to the case, periodically reviewed witness statements and evidence reports. The co-worker had remarried, started a new family, built a life that seemed to exclude any consciousness of Patricia Adkins. But neighbors occasionally reported strange behavior: late-night yard work, obsessive cleaning of vehicles, angry outbursts when local news mentioned the case. School counselors helped Patty's daughter process the complex emotions of growing up with unsolved tragedy. How do you grieve someone who might still be alive somewhere? How do you move forward when the past remains unresolved? How do you trust a world that can make people disappear without consequence? The answers would have to wait for justice that seemed increasingly elusive with each passing year. The FBI's involvement in 2016 brought new hope and advanced technology to Patricia Adkins' case. Cold case specialists from the Bureau's Cincinnati office arrived with equipment manuals for forensic techniques that hadn't existed when Patty disappeared. The FBI laboratory in Quantico could analyze microscopic evidence that local facilities couldn't process 15 years earlier. Fiber samples from the co-worker's truck, DNA traces from Patty's personal items, even soil samples from various locations could be examined with unprecedented precision. Agent Jennifer Walsh, a veteran of dozens of cold cases, spread the evidence across sterile tables in the Union County Sheriff's Office. She approached the case with fresh eyes, unencumbered by years of frustration and dead ends that had worn down local investigators. "Time can be an ally in cases like this," she told Detective Chen. "People change, memories surface, technology advances. What seemed impossible to prove in 2001 might be solvable today." The FBI's involvement also brought pressure. Media outlets picked up the story of federal agents reviewing a local cold case, generating renewed public interest. The co-worker, now in his 50s, found reporters occasionally calling his workplace and neighbors asking questions about events from decades past. But the advanced technology yielded frustratingly familiar results. DNA degradation, contamination from the investigation process, and the passage of time had eroded much of the evidence's potential value. The microscopic traces that remained told a story investigators already knew. Patricia Adkins had been in that truck bed, and someone had worked very hard to erase any proof of what happened to her there. Agent Walsh's preliminary reports filled another section of the growing case file. The FBI's involvement brought expertise and resources, but it couldn't overcome the fundamental problem that had stymied prosecution from the beginning. Without a body, without a confession, without that one crucial piece of evidence, the case remained legally frozen. The television interview aired on a quiet Tuesday evening in 2018, but its impact rippled through Marysville for weeks afterward. Patty's sister, now graying but still determined, sat across from the local news anchor and spoke words that had been building inside her for 17 years. "We know who killed our sister," she said, looking directly into the camera. "Everyone in this community knows. The police know. But knowing and proving are different things, and Patricia deserves justice, not just suspicion." The interview transcript would be filed with hundreds of other documents in the case record, but her words carried weight beyond official paperwork. She spoke about the financial cost of endless searches, the emotional toll of anniversaries without closure, the community's collective trauma from a crime that remained unpunished. "People ask us why we don't move on," she continued. "How do you move on when someone you love was murdered and her killer walks free? How do you find peace when the person responsible might be standing behind you in line at the grocery store?" Detective Chen watched the interview from her office, noting how the family's pain had evolved over the years. The raw grief of early years had transformed into something harder, more focused, a determination that burned steadily rather than flaring and fading. Investigators maintained their careful optimism for public consumption, but privately they wrestled with the same frustrations that haunted the family. They believed they knew what happened to Patricia Adkins, believed they knew who was responsible. But the legal system demanded more than belief. The interview generated its predictable burst of tips and renewed media attention. Anonymous letters arrived at the sheriff's office, some containing wild theories, others offering sympathy. One envelope contained only a newspaper clipping of Patty's missing person story with a single word written across it: "Remember." The word echoed through the months that followed. Remember Patricia Adkins. Remember that justice delayed is justice denied. Remember that someone, somewhere, knows exactly what happened on that July night in 2001. The pandemic years brought isolation and introspection to families across America. But for Patricia Adkins' relatives, the forced solitude only intensified their private grief. Video calls replaced family gatherings, and the empty chair that had marked every holiday now existed in pixels and memory. The world's attention shifted to immediate crises, hospitals overwhelmed, businesses closing, daily life transformed. Cold cases from 2001 seemed ancient history, when people struggled to navigate 2020's urgent realities. Media coverage of missing persons cases dwindled as newsrooms focused on infection rates and economic uncertainty. Yet the family's commitment never wavered. Patty's sister organized virtual memorial services. Her daughter participated in online support groups for families of missing persons, and investigators continued working cases despite reduced staffing and restricted travel. The co-worker, now approaching retirement age, lived quietly in a neighboring county. Neighbors occasionally noticed him working in his yard, still maintaining vehicles with obsessive care, still avoiding eye contact when local news mentioned Patricia Adkins. The pandemic provided additional cover for isolation. Everyone stayed home now. Everyone avoided their neighbors. Everyone had reasons to keep to themselves. Detective Chen, working from her home office, digitized case files, and organized evidence photos on her computer screen. The physical distance from the evidence room didn't diminish her commitment to solving the case, but it highlighted how much the investigation had become an exercise in documentation rather than active pursuit. Social media memorial pages for Patricia kept her memory alive in digital spaces. Friends shared photographs from before her disappearance. Family members posted anniversary remembrances, and strangers offered condolences and theories. The online community of support grew, but virtual sympathy couldn't substitute for real justice. When the world began reopening in 2022, the case remained exactly where it had been in March 2020. Unsolved, unresolved, but not forgotten. The 22nd anniversary in 2023 brought renewed media attention and an announcement that elevated hopes once again. Sheriff Williams, Jr., son of the sheriff who had originally handled the case, stood before cameras and declared a comprehensive review partnership with FBI cold case specialists. 22 years is too long for any family to wait for answers, he announced, flanked by federal agents and county prosecutors. We're bringing every available resource to bear on Patricia Adkins' disappearance. The anniversary news article appeared in papers across Ohio, featuring recent photographs of Patty's daughter, now a woman in her 20s, alongside the familiar missing person photo from 2001. The contrast highlighted not just the passage of time, but the permanence of loss. Online true crime communities seized on the announcement, creating detailed timelines and evidence analyses that sometimes rivaled official investigations in thoroughness. Reddit threads devoted thousands of comments to theories about the case, while YouTube creators produced documentary-style videos that reached audiences far beyond Ohio. The renewed attention brought both hope and frustration to the family. Media requests increased, but so did conspiracy theories and amateur detective work that occasionally interfered with official investigations. Social media platforms amplified both support and speculation in equal measure. Detective Chen, now supervising a team of investigators, appreciated the public interest but worried about information contamination. Too much attention could drive witnesses underground or prompt the responsible party to destroy evidence they might have kept for decades. The co-worker, approached by reporters, declined all interviews through his attorney. His silence, while legally prudent, fed public speculation about guilt and consciousness of wrongdoing. Local businesses displayed missing person flyers again. Community leaders scheduled prayer services, and the case file grew thicker with new tips and renewed witness interviews. The momentum felt different this time, more organized, more professional, more hopeful. But momentum and resolution remain two very different things. The Honda plant parking lot held different memories now, but the memorial remained. Someone the family never learned who had planted flowers around the simple wooden cross and maintained them through seasons of growth and dormancy. The vigil on July 2, 2023, drew the largest crowd in years. Patty's daughter, now an adult with her own apartment and career, stood where her mother had last been seen 22 years earlier. She held a hand-painted sign created by local art students. Patricia Adkins, beloved mother, sister, friend, never forgotten. The sign had been crafted with care, bright colors that would be visible from across the parking lot, lettering that remained readable even from a distance. It represented the community's artistic tribute to memory, their collective refusal to let time erase Patricia's significance. "I don't remember her voice anymore," Patty's daughter told the crowd, her own voice steady despite tears. "I was so young when she disappeared, but I remember feeling safe with her. I remember knowing I was loved completely, unconditionally." The vigil included testimonies from co-workers who still thought about Patricia, church members who continued praying for justice, and law enforcement officials who promised continued investigation. The crowd was diverse. Some had known Patty personally. Others had followed the case through media coverage. Many were simply neighbors who believed in supporting families touched by tragedy. As darkness fell and candles were lit, the memorial took on an ethereal quality. Hundreds of small flames flickered against the night sky, creating a constellation of remembrance in the place where hope had died. and determination had been born. The co-worker did not attend, continuing a pattern of absence that stretched back to the original search efforts. His non-participation was noted by many, discussed quietly among small groups after the formal ceremony concluded. When the vigil ended, the painted sign remained, propped against the memorial cross like a promise that this story would continue until justice finally arrived. The evidence room key turned with the same metallic click it had made hundreds of times over the past 2 decades. Detective Chen led FBI agent Walsh through rows of shelved boxes, each containing pieces of lives interrupted by crime. Patricia Adkins occupied an entire section, bankers' boxes filled with witness statements, photographs, forensic reports, and the accumulated detritus of a case that refused to close. The team spread files across the conference table with the systematic precision of experienced investigators. Every document was photographed, digitized, and cross-referenced with new databases that hadn't existed in 2001. Names were run through updated systems, addresses were verified against current records, and witness statements were analyzed for inconsistencies that time might have revealed. The original investigation was thorough, Agent Walsh observed, reading through Detective Manning's meticulous notes. They followed every lead, interviewed every relevant person, processed all available evidence. But they didn't have what we have now, Chen replied, pointing to computer screens displaying forensic analysis capabilities that seemed like science fiction 20 years earlier. The team reaffirmed their collective belief. Patricia Adkins was dead, killed by someone she trusted, and that someone had successfully destroyed or hidden evidence of the crime. The co-worker remained their primary person of interest, but primary suspicion alone couldn't support prosecution. They recontacted witnesses, hoping age might have loosened tongues or clarified memories. A few Honda workers who had moved away agreed to new interviews, sharing details they might have forgotten or been afraid to mention decades earlier. But nothing rose to the level of breakthrough evidence. The evidence room sessions became ritual weekly gatherings where investigators spread Patricia's life across tables and tried to decode the mystery of her death. Each session ended the same way. Files returned to boxes. Boxes returned to shelves. Case still open, but no closer to resolution. The key turned again, locking away evidence that pointed toward truth but couldn't quite reach justice. Sunday morning services at First Baptist Church of Marysville included a prayer request that had become tradition. Patricia Adkins' name appeared in the church bulletin under long-term prayer concerns, alongside requests for healing, guidance, and comfort. The congregation had prayed for her family for over 2 decades. Grant wisdom to investigators, Pastor Williams intoned from the pulpit, and bring peace to Patricia's family while they wait for answers. The family attended regularly, finding strength in communal worship and shared faith. Patty's sister taught Sunday school, her daughter sang in the choir, and her mother helped organize church suppers where Patricia's empty chair had become an invisible presence that everyone acknowledged through silence. Sermons about patience, justice, and trusting God's timing felt simultaneously comforting and challenging to people who had waited so long for earthly justice. How do you balance faith with frustration? How do you trust divine plans when human systems fail so completely? Justice may be delayed. Pastor Williams preached one particularly difficult Sunday, but it is never denied. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried deep. The congregation included people who had worked with Patricia, people who remembered her kindness and dedication. It also included people who had their suspicions about certain members of the community, though such thoughts were never voiced aloud in sacred spaces. After services, small groups gathered in the parking lot or fellowship hall, sharing updates about the case, discussing media coverage, offering support to the family. These conversations served as informal networks of information and encouragement, keeping Patricia's memory alive in the community's collective consciousness. The prayer requests multiplied over time for the family's strength, for investigative breakthroughs, for the responsible party's conscience to compel confession. Each Sunday brought renewed commitment to never stop seeking truth, never stop supporting those who loved Patricia, never stopped believing that justice would eventually arrive. The FBI laboratory report arrived on a Thursday morning, its technical language unable to mask the disappointment within. Agent Walsh reviewed the findings with Detective Chen, both women understanding that advanced science had reached the same conclusions as investigations from 20 years earlier. DNA degradation, environmental contamination, insufficient sample sizes, Walsh summarized, closing the folder. The evidence tells us what we already knew, but it doesn't give us anything new we can use in court. The lab had analyzed fabric fibers, soil samples, microscopic traces that might have escaped earlier examination. Sophisticated equipment had magnified, compared, and categorized evidence with precision impossible in 2001. But time and deliberate destruction had eroded the physical proof that might have connected Patricia Adkins' disappearance to her killer. Chen felt the familiar weight of frustration that had characterized this case from the beginning. Every technological advance brought hope. Every scientific breakthrough suggested possibilities. But the fundamental obstacles remained unchanged. Someone had planned carefully, acted quickly, and covered their tracks thoroughly. "We keep investigating," Walsh said, though both women understood the limitations they faced. Cases like this sometimes break when you least expect them. Someone develops a conscience. Someone makes a mistake. Someone decides they can't live with secrets anymore. The FBI partnership continued, but resources were finite and other cases demanded attention. Patricia Adkins would remain a priority, but not the only priority. Her file would be reviewed regularly. Her case would stay officially open, but the intensive focus was shifting to more promising investigations. The lab report joined hundreds of other documents in the evidence room, another negative result in a collection of systematic attempts to find proof that remained tantalizingly out of reach. Science had done everything possible. Now justice would have to wait for human conscience to fill the gaps that forensics couldn't bridge. The recorded interview began with careful questions and gentle encouragement. Patricia Adkins' daughter, now 25 years old, sat across from a documentary filmmaker who had approached the family about creating a comprehensive examination of the case. "I grew up without knowing if my mother was dead or if she might walk through the doors someday," she said, her voice steady but weighted with years of accumulated pain. "That kind of uncertainty changes how you see the world." The audio file captured nuances that written statements couldn't convey, the slight hesitation before she said, "Mother," the way her voice strengthened when discussing justice, the careful control that suggested years of learning to manage grief publicly. She described growing up with questions her relatives couldn't answer, developing relationships with teachers and counselors who helped fill maternal gaps, navigating adolescence and young adulthood with the constant awareness that her story was fundamentally different from her peers. "People sometimes ask if I remember her," she continued. "I remember fragments being held, feeling safe, the sound of her laugh. But mostly I remember the absence. I remember learning to live around a hole in my life that should have been filled by her presence." The interview lasted 2 hours, covering childhood memories, family dynamics, the community's response to her mother's disappearance, and her hopes for eventual justice. Her words carried the authority of lived experience and the weight of inherited trauma. "I want whoever did this to know that they didn't just kill my mother," she concluded. "They changed our entire family's trajectory. They stole not just her life, but pieces of all our lives. That kind of damage ripples through generations." The recording would be transcribed, filed with other case documents, and potentially broadcast to audiences who might hold crucial information. Her words had power, the power to ignite fresh empathy, to compel conscience, to remind communities that cold cases represent warm human hearts that never stop hoping for truth. The town hall meeting drew more than 200 residents to the Marysville Community Center on a humid evening in late summer. Sheriff Williams, Jr., had called the gathering to discuss the Patricia Adkins case and address growing public frustration with the lack of resolution. The meeting minutes would record questions that had simmered in the community for over 2 decades. Why hadn't the person of interest been arrested? What evidence was still missing? How could someone disappear so completely in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business? We understand your frustration, Sheriff Williams told the assembled crowd. We share it. We want justice for Patricia and closure for her family as much as you do. But the meeting also revealed uncomfortable truths about how tragedy affects small communities. Some residents admitted they'd always suspected the coworker but felt powerless to act on suspicion alone. Others confessed they'd avoided discussing the case because it made them feel unsafe, uncertain about whom they could trust. This case has cast a shadow over our town, one longtime resident said during the public comment period. We've all lived with this unresolved tragedy, and it's affected how we see each other, how we trust each other. The meeting served as collective therapy as much as public information session. People shared memories of Patricia, expressed support for her family, and acknowledged the ways her disappearance had changed Marysville's sense of itself as a safe, close-knit community. Some residents called for renewed pressure on the person of interest, though officials carefully explained the legal constraints that prevented more aggressive action. Others suggested community-funded rewards or private investigation services, though such efforts had been tried before without success. The meeting ended with a commitment to increased community vigilance and continued support for law enforcement efforts. But it also acknowledged a painful reality. Some wounds heal slowly, and some scars remain visible long after the initial trauma. The family photograph sat on the mantelpiece with an empty picture frame beside it, a visual representation of permanent loss and enduring hope. Patricia Adkins' relatives had gathered in their traditional spot for Christmas 2023, the same living room where they'd waited for her to call from Canada 22 years earlier. The empty frame had been Patty's daughter's idea. Until we know what happened to her, until we can lay her to rest properly, there's still a space waiting to be filled, she had explained when she placed it there years earlier. The conversation moved through familiar rhythms, updates from investigators, discussions of media coverage, plans for the next anniversary vigil. But underneath the routine updates lay the deeper currents of a family that had learned to live with unresolved grief. The case is still officially open, Patty's sister reported. Detective Chen says they're still following up on tips from the recent publicity. The FBI partnership continues, even if it hasn't produced the breakthrough we hoped for. Her mother, now in her 80s, nodded slowly. She had outlived her daughter, raised her granddaughter, and waited 2 decades for justice that seemed no closer than when the investigation began. We made a promise, the older woman said quietly. We promised we wouldn't stop looking, wouldn't stop asking questions, wouldn't let people forget her name. The daughter, now planning her own wedding, faced decisions about how to honor her mother's memory in ceremonies Patricia would never attend. Should there be an empty chair at the reception? A moment of silence during the ceremony? A photograph at the family table? As the evening wound down and family members prepared to leave, they stood together before the mantelpiece. The family photo showed a complete group. The empty frame reminded them that completion remained elusive. We will not stop until Patty comes home, they said together, repeating the vow that had sustained them through more than 2 decades of waiting, hoping, and refusing to surrender to silence. The investigation continues. The case remains open. The family keeps vigil. In small towns across America, similar stories unfold: missing persons who become cold cases, families who become advocates, communities that learn to live with unresolved tragedy. Patricia Adkins disappeared on June 29, 2001. But her story didn't end that night in the Honda parking lot. It continues in the determination of investigators who refuse to abandon difficult cases, in the love of a family that won't accept defeat, in the conscience of a community that knows justice delayed is not justice denied. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to Patricia Adkins. Someone holds the key to bringing her home, to giving her family the closure they've sought for more than 2 decades, to ensuring that truth finally triumphs over deception. Until that day comes, the vigil continues. The investigation persists. The hope endures. And Patricia's memory convicts us all to never stop seeking justice, never stop believing in truth, never stop fighting for those who can no longer fight for themselves.